Hey, rookies, and welcome back to the Rookie Farmer Podcast. This is the home of the dreamers, the schemers, and the hustlers here in the world of small scale agriculture. If you're new here, my name is Alec Smith. I will be your host as well as the grower here at Crop Culture Farm in New Bern, Georgia. All right, veggie farmers, market gardeners, lovers of all things selling vegetables. This one is going to be a little bit of a curveball for you. So let's talk egg production. We're sitting down this week with Patrick Samuels of Sunnyside Egg Company. They are a small up and coming regenerative pasture-raised egg production company, farm, collaborative, co-op, whatever you want to call it. There's many different things that you could call it, and many different names that we call it in this episode. But Patrick has a background in working in large scale commercial egg production with some of the quote unquote pasture raised egg companies. And it was his time there that really spurred him to go out on his own and to begin his own company, focusing on growing really high quality pasture raised, regeneratively raised eggs to sell to grocery stores and to the greater public. We get into all of the details on the nuances of how they have managed their business and how they've scaled it from 50 chickens to, I believe, 7,000 chickens over the last 6 months of being in business. We also talk about a lot of the importance of building businesses as communities and how we can help each other out, how we can sort of pool our resources together and share the weights and the burdens of business and of life. And we also get a little bit of a behind the scenes peek into what the big boys are like when it comes to the, like I said, quote unquote, pasture raised chickens. All that and so much more in this episode with Patrick Samuels of Sunnyside Egg Co. All right, Patrick, thank you so much, man, for sitting down and talking with me. As we had mentioned offline, we've been wanting to branch out, wanting to sort of get out of the black hole sometimes that can be market gardening, where we just talk vegetables all day long, every day. And maybe we'll get a little wild and throw in some fruit production here and there. But yeah, you reached out to me about what you guys have going on, and it was sort of perfectly timed. So for the folks who have never heard of you, which hopefully will be a lot of people, and they'll get you to sort of introduce yourself and your brand. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on, man.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, my name's Patrick Samuels. I started Sunnyside Egg Co., which is attempting to be the first company to scale regenerative egg production. Meaning we started in our backyard with 50 chickens, and now we're up to about 7,000 chickens. We use mobile chicken houses where the chickens are rotated around fresh pastures. They have complete outdoor access 365 days a year. And yeah, really right now, if you're familiar with like the egg industry, every single egg on a grocery store shelf was raised by a hen that lives inside of a barn and might have access to the outdoors. But even in free range pasture raised systems, somewhere around 90 to 95% of those eggs are coming from a chicken that has never actually gone outdoors. And so even though it might be labeled pasture raised, the likelihood of that chicken ever being outdoors, raised it, outdoors in nature is pretty low. So we kind of thought maybe there was an opportunity in a market there for people who wanted like truly, raised outdoors eggs. And so that's what we're starting to do. And yeah, right now there's no other company. There's kind of individual farms who are doing that. If you're familiar with like Joel Salton or Alexander Family Farms or some folks like that, Quadgy Cove, I think, is kind of a little bit closer to you guys. And there's like individual farms who have grown to maybe, 10, 15,000 birds in mobile coops. But right now there's no companies who are doing it at the like, 40, 50, 100,000 bird kind of range. And so that's what we hope our, trajectory looks like, where we can build kind of a network of small farms to piecemeal together, kind of a large quantity and start putting regeneratively raised eggs on shelves.
Yeah, that's that sounds like one ambitious goal.
Yeah.
Like why eggs though? I mean, it's like, there's so many people like obviously in this space, everyone that kind of goes into vegetable production or, people are like, oh, let's do cattle or kind of thinking Joel Salatin wise, everyone goes to like the broilers on pasture or something like that. But like, what was it about egg production specifically that was like, yeah, this is what I'm gonna do?
Yeah, so just for reference, and I was in the military and I got out of the military just a couple years ago, and on my way out of the military, my wife and I were kind of like, we had started looking into homesteading. We had been watching Joel Salatin videos, and fitting for the name of your podcast here, I had like zero farm experience. Like I had never farmed a day in my life. My dad had worked for some farmers when I was young, like really young, but I had zero farming experience. So literally everything we learned on YouTube, and then or just reading some books and that sort of thing. And then so getting out of the military, we wanted to start doing the homestead thing, and so we started raising some backyard chickens, both for meat and for eggs. And then we've got some cattle out back as well. And then I went and worked for one of the big pasture-raised egg companies, and so kind of got to see what the egg industry looks like. And just from my own experience, kind of out back, I personally like to have a little bit more time with the animal. Like I just think there's a little bit more stewardship involved. Whenever you compare like eggs versus broilers,
Mm.
just because of the timeline for broilers, a lot of times is like 8 weeks. And so you just have 8 weeks, every 8 weeks, you're like churning a new animal. And so I kind of I just personally enjoy, egg production. Like it's interesting to me. I've liked it kind of since we started it. It's something easy for my kids to do too. We've got, young boys. And so like, when I'm busy, my wife and our two boys can go out back, collect eggs, and it's kind of something for them to do out on the farm that doesn't require a lot of labor. And then also, seeing it from the sort of industry side, like what the actual industry looks like behind the scenes, was definitely an eye opener. Because if you go into a grocery store and you see pasture raised eggs, in your mind you immediately think like, oh, those are chickens who are, of course, raised outdoor. They are raised on pasture, as the name
Yeah.
would suggest. And what I learned was that is like, and yeah, probably 90% of eggs purchased on the store, that is like completely false. Like the vast majority of chickens in a pasture raised system never go outdoors, let alone are like truly raised outdoors. And so, yeah, I just kind of thought there was a market for maybe a little bit more transparent model, and a little bit more honest model. And so we've, in sort of light of that, we've always said, like, if you're a buyer for a company, or for like a retailer, or you're just a customer, you can always reach out to us and like come see what the actual operation looks like. That way, you know what it is you're getting whenever you buy from us, rather than us sort of hiding behind, certifications or claims, or, wording that is not verified by anybody. So
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we, us personally have prided ourselves in, but I'd say most like small scale farms is, one, customers can come out and meet us. We're there at the market. They can ask me questions, whatever they want to. And yeah, and we have an open door policy. Thankfully, most people aren't dropping by
yeah,
unannounced.
yeah,
We just a little aside, when we first started, I was like, yeah, we're just like open door policy. Anybody can come whenever they want to.
yeah,
And pretty quickly, I had a fellow farmer. Well, they're a beekeeper, came by, kind of just had been following on Instagram, and like I was in the neighborhood, figured I'd stop by, and it was just like, what are you doing here? I've got so much I have to do right now.
yeah,
Like, please,
yeah,
like, please go away. Like, I cannot stop and talk to you right now. But
yeah,
but I will always make time for, especially customers who are wanting to really understand, the way that we're doing things, show them our wash pack, show them like, hey, this is how we do our tomatoes in the tunnel, and so on and so forth. And so, I think that's really important because, like you said, even though it says one thing on the label, you learn pretty quickly once you're sort of in this game, whether big scale, small scale, or even if you're just like a really conscientious eater, that it's
yeah,
like, okay, these labels don't really mean anything.
yeah,
I think for most people, it was sort of the demystification of free range. That was sort of
mm,
the
mm,
first big eye opener. Is like, oh man, yeah, there's like a
yeah,
little, doggy door, and they can go out onto like a concrete
yeah,
pad.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and honestly, it was probably even cage free even before that. It's just
mm,
every step of the way. It's like, all right, let's be, 10% more humane than the absolute abysmal conditions we
yeah,
were in
yeah.
previously.
Yeah. And that's what
Um,
I'm a huge proponent of we're kind of like the next generation of that, I think, and we're
yeah,
kind of on the forefront of it because again, you've seen we've seen individual farms that can scale regenerative egg production, but we haven't seen it like on major retail shelves. You're not seeing regeneratively raised eggs in Walmart or in Kroger or somewhere like that. And so, that's the direction that we're kind of heading. And it's been pretty interesting for us too because we do have some barn raised hens that they all meet kind of like what everyone else calls pasture raised, we call free range, and so those are hens raised in barns with outdoor access. We do have some hens. We have a separate product line where we do that, and so what's been really cool is we have customers who come out and we show them our place where we have hens raised outdoors, a super small flock, rotated around pasture behind cattle, that sort of multi-species grazing, and then we take them out to our free range farm and we say this is what free range means to us, but if you're paying $12 in the grocery store for something called pasture raised, well, this is what it looks like, and they're always shocked because they're like, well, this looks a lot more like what I think of as like a factory farm than what you just showed me with what you guys call pasture raised, where you use a mobile system and the chickens are all outdoors, and so it's been really cool to see customers really gain an understanding for what labels really mean and kind of be able to compare and contrast two different systems even within our own network.
yeah, and just to play devil's advocate, does it really matter? I mean, like, if a chicken is as long as they're comfortable and they've, got the necessary amount of space that's, sort of recommended to be humane and they're given good quality feed and, and all that sort of stuff, like, I mean, is there really that much of a difference at the end of the day?
Yeah, it really depends, I guess, on what you want. Because if we sort of collectively as a society decide we don't really care about what the raising of our chickens is,
Mhm.
then basically we would go out of business immediately. But there is a market demand, and I guess my real concern is that people are paying for $12 a dozen or something for some of these higher end organic pasture raised eggs, and they're not getting what they're paying for. And so if we're going to pay a premium price, well, then you might as well get what you think you're getting. And the flip side of that too is again kind of like you alluded to standards. Free range, for example. There is a humane certification out there that's pretty popular where you can put 100,000 birds on 5 acres, and it be considered a free range chicken. And so that's at 1.2 square feet of space inside the barn, and then 2 square feet of outdoor access. So, is that allowing a chicken to express its sort of natural chicken nature? I would argue probably not. I would argue that you probably put a lot of stress on the animal. You also put a lot of stress on the land. You put a lot of stress on the
Mhm.
farmer. And so inevitably you have a sort of less nutrient dense egg just by the nature of how you're raising it. But again, the flip side of that too is if you're going to pay for something called free range, if you're going to pay for something called pasture raised, if we've sort of collectively decided that we want to move in the direction of a more humane raising of our animals, then we as companies who are providing the product ought to live up to what the customer expects. And so, it's the same for grass-fed beef, for example. It's like you can label your beef as grass-fed if you just keep a bunch of cows in a barn and then pour grass in front of them, right? They are
Yeah.
technically grass-fed, but that's not what a customer thinks of. Whenever they think of grass-fed, they think of a cow out, on a pasture being rotated around, just like a sort of cow would naturally live. And so again, we as a company, we as farmers owe it to the customer to provide them with a product that they expect, not with a product that's sort of just like our our devious interpretation of it.
And I think too, back to the whole idea of having like an open door policy and showing everything with the grass fed beef thing is, if you live in a rural area or you drive through a rural area, like you're gonna see cow fields, you're gonna see, black Angus or some other variety of cow and they're grazing.
Yeah.
They're eating grass and you're like, oh look, it's this is the life of a cow, and they're gonna
Mhm.
take them from this field and then they're gonna ship them off to the slaughterhouse. And, the reality of it is I can't remember where I heard it, but it's like that, 99% of all cattle will be grass fed for the majority of their life until
Yeah.
the last few months,
Yep.
6 months or so. And so it's, and then, but those those production facilities are not just open to the public. They're not, you can't just see them. We actually have the opportunity. There's a pretty extensive dairy. I can't remember how many, several thousand head of dairy cows that are just around the corner from us. And I see all the fields, and same thing. I've seen the herds of cows or whatever that are out in the field. I'm like, oh, this is great. And like, how do they get those like all the way from this field, 2 miles down the road to like where the milking parlor is? And then once I actually talked to a couple more people and was a little bit more noticing when I drove by, it's like, oh no, these are like sort of the
The show
sort of,
cows or something.
yeah, or sort of like kind of like the calf cow, part of the operation where these are like young cows, they're still being raised up, they haven't been bred yet, so they're still heifers. And they're just kind of out doing their thing, and then it's like, but then once you actually see where the production cows are at that are being milked, twice a day. Yeah, I mean they're in big, huge corrals. They don't have much room to move, and they're just being pumped full of food all day long. And so I think when we, even if we drive through farm country and we think we see what food production looks like, the reality of it is more than likely the mass production of our food that we're buying at the grocery store, like that's usually behind closed doors, behind locked gates. And I think it's for good reason. Some people would say it's like, well, we've got trade secrets. We're just trying to, protect people from wandering on the fields. And I think that's true too. But I think there's also an element of it's like, yeah, we just don't want anybody snooping around.
Yeah, yeah. And to kind of return to your previous point too, I think, or your previous question, I think that we collectively have to decide, what we value as a society and what is important to us. And I've seen plenty of people out there making a case saying, an egg is an egg. If it's raised in a cage system, the chicken drops an egg, you collect it and you eat it. That's no different than a system like ours. Obviously, if you do any sort of research, there's nutrient density differences, but most people probably just inevitably don't care about the difference in like the choline inside of one egg versus another. And so, but I do think we have to reckon ourselves and kind of collectively decide: do we want to strive to raise animals and the food we eat in the most humane way possible, or do we want to strive to just turn it into as much of a production system as possible? Because food production will move in the direction that the customer wants. And so if a customer just says, hey, I want eggs as cheap as humanly possible, I want to pay $1 for a dozen eggs, well, then guess what? If that is our only determining factor, then my system is wrong. Like it cannot be done, using this that I have out here. But if we've decided that we want to raise animals humanely, and we want to raise them in as close to the natural environment as we can, while also maximizing the production value of that animal in that experience. Well, then inevitably, I think the market will move in the direction of more transparent outdoors and nature production for eggs and for beef and for poultry and for everything, really.
Yeah, I mean these companies that are slapping free range, pasture raised, organic, whatever the words may be on their packages. I mean, they're not just doing that because it's like, we really need to diversify. I mean, because there's a market for it. People want it. People,
Yeah.
I think, more are becoming more and more conscientious. And so, yeah, the problem is they're just sort of capitalizing on people's desires and then sort of selling them a false bill of goods, as opposed to, or at least from what you're saying, I'm totally outside of this world of
Yeah.
meat production. And so it's like, I mean, yeah, who knows how many times I've fallen victim to this. I've gone and we try to buy super high quality ones, even ones that are not like the big ones that you're used to seeing at like your Kroger or your Walmart. We're getting them from a more boutique's not the right word, just a non, nationalized or internationalized, corporation, and they're like, oh, they're all from Amish farmers and whatever. Now I'm like, well, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe they are.
Well,
But
that's another funny aspect of it, is that a lot of these companies will put things on their packaging like raised on small family farms, and it's
mhm,
like, well, what's your definition of small and what's your definition of family? Because in the pasture raised world, every major egg company is moving toward exclusively trying to build 20,000 bird barns. In the
Wow.
past, some of them have done, 10,000 bird barns, which is on the smaller side. But like if you go to any major pasture raised egg company's website right now and you go into their like recruit a farmer section, they're looking for farmers with 52 acres of land, which at 108 square feet of outdoor access per bird, outdoor access and quotes there, then that's 20,000 birds. And if you talk to them, that's exclusively what they want to build. And so I've had all sorts of farmers call me and say, hey, I met with this other big egg company, but they want me to put 20,000 birds in a barn, which is about a $2 million investment in order for me to put up. Could we do something smaller with you? And then all of a sudden I tell them about the mobile coops. And actually farmers, what we found recently is that most farmers want to do smaller flocks and they want to do mobile coops because one, they're cheaper to build, but two, then they get a little bit more use out of their land. And so farmers want to do, what we're doing. It's that they're being pressured in many cases into doing something much, more industrialized. The other piece of that too is most of these companies are starting to build corporate barns, like corporate farms, where the company owns the land, they own the barn, they own the chickens, they own the feed, they own everything, and then they just sort of hire people in to come manage those sites. There's multiple egg companies doing that right now, and so the sort of like your picturesque Amish guy out collecting
Hmm.
eggs in the morning, like that is a thing of the past, and many in a lot of the industry, and so we're trying to kind of bring that back.
Yeah. So when exactly did you like when did you start the company? Like when you said I know you've mentioned that you started with like 50 birds in your
Yeah.
backyard. But like when was the sort of like the impetus of like, all right, we're doing this and that we're gonna build a company
Yeah.
and actually try and maybe turn a
Well,
profit one day.
initially it was kind of funny because I own another company too, and so like another small business, and so that got to a point where it was doing well enough that I could kind of leave my job for this other pasture raised company, and so we were kind of like, well, we'll start with a few birds in our back pasture, and maybe it'll grow enough that we can like pay the mortgage. Basically, was our goal because we've only got like 9 acres out here, and we were kind of like maybe we get to a point where we can just pay the mortgage with like a mobile setup. And so in December of this past year, we started with 50 chickens just on like a little side piece of acreage here. And then before we even started selling eggs from there, we were kind of telling people about it, and people were like, "Oh, we would," we had enough demand that we were like, "Okay, maybe it's worth investing in 350 chickens." And so then we ordered another 300 chickens and a larger mobile coop out back. And so at the end of December, we had 350 chickens. By April, we were up to, I think, about 6,000 across 5 farms. And so in, a span of from the end of December to the start of April, we went from 350 chickens in our backyard to 6,000 across a handful of farms. Um,
And you're saying like December of 24 to
yeah,
April,
to
like
April, like a couple months ago. Yeah,
wow.
yeah, and then we're up to about 7,000 birds right now. We just put in another 1,000 birds in a mobile coop on Friday night, and then we have. Yeah, we put out a little ad in this sort of like Amish newspaper, this Amish magazine, and I actually had to call him today and tell him to stop running the ad
Mm.
because I was spent for the past week. I have spent all day, every day, getting phone calls from farmers who are like, "Hey, we saw your ad that you're doing mobile coops. We're interested in doing it with you." And so, like, I would say within the next year or two, we have like pretty strong potential at sending, truckloads worth of regeneratively raised eggs, kind of around the country. And
And where are you located?
we're in Kentucky, outside of like
Okay,
Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Western
gotcha.
Kentucky. And
Yeah.
so, fortunately for us, there's already kind of there's a lot of Amish and Mennonite farmers around here who are, looking for that sort of thing, and they want to work on the farm and they want to stay on the farm. And so, and we have a really good relationship with both Amish and Mennonite communities in the area. And so, that's kind of how we recruited the first handful of farmers. Was people just already knew we were doing it, and they're like, "Well, that sounds pretty cool." So, they wanted to hop on board too, and yeah, initially our plan was just to stay local. Well, in the very early days, it was kind of just to sell to a couple little stores, or like sell. We actually started when we first started. We were sending them in the mail. We were boxing up cartons of eggs, and we were sending them in the mail to folks. Um, and then we started to get some. I mean, we just eggs went absolute berserk. And so back in like January, February timeframe. And when that happened, that's whenever we started bringing on more farmers. And and we had to shut down the sort of mail, the mailer eggs, because the logistics got too complicated to do both that and retail stores. But yeah, that's how we started. And then, yeah, it's taken off like crazy from there. So,
Yeah, that's I mean, I guess so. I mean, so in a lot of ways, I mean, the fact of, where you were strategically located has made it to where, I'm assuming that none of these farmers are, like, hey, we want to do chickens for the first time. Like they're
yeah.
probably already, they've been doing this. Maybe they've been selling to another company and they're saying, like, we just want to, you know, retool our operation, just kind of fall under your guidelines and start selling to you, or we want to make a big huge shift and
Mhm.
go away from big egg production, big egg houses to doing like this. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think most people are accustomed to the like kind of the solopreneur, you
Mhm.
know, people like myself. It's like it is everything is in house. I am the harvest manager. I'm in charge of the greenhouse. I am in charge of all the finances,
Yep.
HR, you're looking at it. And so scaling is extremely difficult because it's essentially, what do I have the capacity as an individual, or maybe with a little bit of hired help,
Mm.
what do I have the capacity to physically expand in a limited amount of time with a limited amount of resources?
Yep.
But if you can sort of go the, I mean, what would it be fair to call this like a collaborative sort of
Yeah,
model?
we've been kind of calling it like a co-op, because
Yeah.
I technically own the company or whatever, like own the brand, but
Mhm.
like I also am one of the farmers. I know like most of the farmers I kind of knew before, or at least they knew of me. I kind of knew of them before we even started this whole thing. So we kind of been calling it a co-op. Yeah, kind of touching on your point about, doing it ourselves. That was one of the things that I kind of saw in the regenerative agriculture movement, is that in the past, the sort of regenerative agriculture has been done almost exclusively on, singular farms, where it's like one farm in an area is that, like, they're the ones doing multi-species, rotational grazing. But they're not partnering with any other farms in their area to like start making that a viable option for like a large quantity, a large population of people. I think if you're familiar with like Pasture Bird,
Yeah, they're down here. They're down here, South Georgia,
yeah, yeah,
not I mean,
exactly.
maybe a couple hours away from us.
Yeah, so they're probably the first ones who are kind of who kind of started doing that, who kind of looked at it as like how do you mix this sort of regenerative agriculture movement with an understanding of like, scaling and turning it into a national brand and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of the model that we're, piggybacking off of a little bit. But yeah, I guess just it's a little bit of a challenge, because none of these corporations want to touch the sort of regenerative agriculture, or they're just not willing to take on, the sort of risk associated, the challenge associated with it. And so it leaves, a market for guys like me who are like, well, hey, I'll partner with a handful of other farms and give it a shot and see what happens. And yeah, so far it's been going well.
From the farmer side of things, why do you think it is that most folks just tend to go it alone? Just tend to be like, "This is my operation, sell to my customers, I make the profit." Why do you think we, and I say we and myself included, like, why do you think we tend to fall into this slot of, "This is my business and I'm gonna
Yeah.
run it."
I personally think it's kind of cultural at this point. Like if you compare I'm comfortable comparing normal society to Amish society, because most of our friends are Amish. Like we've been to Amish church, we go to Amish folks' houses for dinner. Like it's like we're very kind of ingrained in their community, and their communities are much more community oriented. And so whenever they
Mhm.
start something, the community all kind of pitches in to help it. In sort of normal American society, we've become very siloed in just everyday life, and I think that you know manifests in business as well. So then whenever we go to start something, we don't think, well, how many people can I partner with to create the best product, the most accessible product? We think, you know, what can I do with my business on my land to support my family, um, and I think that really creates a little bit of a chokehold for farmers, particularly in something like broilers or beef or eggs, because it's like, well, again, kind of going back to our goal is right now there, if again, collectively as a society, we have to decide what we want to do. If regenerative agriculture is the direction that we want to move, well, then that means that we need to start building the networks and the logistics necessary to bring regenerative agriculture from individual farms into major retail grocery stores. And so that's what we've been, really trying to think through. And yeah, I mean, there's clearly a customer base for it, and I think that a lot of customers don't have access to just, if you live in Nashville or Atlanta or something like that, it's like, well, most people don't have access to a farmer. Like, they don't know a farmer, because there's
Mhm.
so few farmers out there. And so trying to find you cannot make any kind of product that is regeneratively raised, locally raised, accessible to a large quantity of people unless you partner with other folks to do it, or unless you just have, if you're like Ted Turner and just own, millions of acres of land, then maybe you can do like natural rotationally grazed bison or something like that. But like for most of us, like you and me, we're starting out on small acreage. And so if our goal, from the farmer aspect is to like make this style of agriculture as accessible as possible, well, then inevitably we have to partner with other people. And I think everybody kind of benefits through partnership. We don't benefit whenever we silo ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's a very American ideal to like being the rugged individualism,
Mhm.
blaze our own trail, go out west, carve our own little homestead out of the wilderness. And even though none of us have like come from that life, I think
Mhm.
we've all been taught that, or it's just so imbued in our culture that even if we can't consciously say like, "Oh, I remember the moment that I was taught about, manifest destiny," that it's like, I mean, I can remember going through that in school, but it's such an integral part to our kind of modern 21st century way of life in kind of not just America, in the Western world. You see companies with last names, and it's like these are individuals. You think of the Gilded Age robber barons of
Mhm.
building these massive things, and those are the people that we look to as successful, and not
Mhm.
the people who were tenant farmers or sharecroppers who were just doing their best to just make a living and survive and maybe earn a super modest living, and that was good enough for them. Like, we don't
Yeah.
celebrate, we don't really honor and cheerlead those people. We celebrate the ones who are killing it. And I think um that's a big impetus around me doing this podcast, is because, in at least in this market garden space, it has just been dominated with like make $100,000 on an acre, or,
Mhm.
do $200,000 on half an acre, whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
be super successful.
Mhm.
And just wanted to create a space and create an avenue for conversation that's like, let's be realistic here.
Yeah.
It's like, let's talk about like, "Hey, we paid rent on time this month."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we
For real.
we did this sort of stuff, and we did it, and we had a lot of help from other people, even if it wasn't directly like you're farming and I'm farming and we're
Mhm.
pooling our resources together. Sometimes it's more of just, you know, you I'm getting help from this person and from that person, and we're all and then it kind of all comes in through the farm, and then it kind of goes out its own way. And yeah, and so I think there is an element of having to sort of shed that Americanism of like, it's my business, it's my success. How much profit can I make as an individual? And begin to think more community wise, which, I mean, we throw the word community out so much, but even if
Yeah.
it's just like, the three or four farmers that you personally know, that you can like, hey, we can build something that can weather a storm way better than any of us
Mhm.
individually. And then hopefully, because we are pooling our resources together, you're like, I can't even imagine the amount of work it would have been for you to try to get into grocery stores with just your
Mhm. Oh,
350
yeah.
birds.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And a good example of that is whenever I kind of first moved up here and we first bought some land. Like I still don't have a tractor. We didn't have a tractor, and but like we need to cut hay because we didn't have enough cattle on there to like graze down everything, and and I'm sure some of the answer to some of this question is, just individual pride as well. Cause like in my mind, I was like, well, I got to figure it out myself. I got to figure out how to get the hay cut and baled and everything myself. So I guess I need to start looking for a tractor and, a bush
Hmm.
hog and then a baler system. And I got to figure out how to bale hay myself, and I got to figure out how to do it all myself. And then I kind of just mentioned it in conversation when I was hanging out with some of my Amish friends. I was just like, oh yeah, I don't really have a good solution for this or whatever right now. And they were kind of just like, oh, we'll just borrow my tractor and cut your hay. And then, Howard, this other guy will come bale it for you for, like pennies on the dollar compared to what it would cost to do it yourself, And so like, yeah, I think it cost me, I think, to bale our whole field or whatever last fall, it was like maybe $200 or something, for all the hay we needed for the winter, for our cattle. And that was all just because, a couple of a couple of guys who understood community a little bit more inherently than I did. We're just like, well, just borrow my tractor. Like, why would you go out and buy one? Like, I have one, just use it.
Yeah,
And so there's a little bit of pride too in not wanting to ask for help, I think sometimes, from folks. And
definitely.
so yeah. Yeah, just gotta humble yourself and overcome that one.
Yeah, and I think that's I think as people are sort of kinda as we're sort of I don't know, I'm trying to think how to put this in the right way. As we sort of repopulate the rural areas of the country for better or for worse, people are like, I feel like there was this mad dash into cities and now there's sort of this mad dash out.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Obviously you run the risk of things like, suburban sprawl and all that. And we had a previous episode talking about how we can conserve farmland and all that sort
Mm,
of stuff. But we're beginning to see like more and more folks opening small farms, doing operations where, maybe before it would have been one guy with 400 acres. Now there's, well, just make it easy, four guys with 100 acres or so on and so
mhm,
forth. That yeah, I think it's time to sort of re-embrace that sense of collectivism.
yeah,
It's like, all right, we don't all have to have the tractor. Like if you have the tractor
mhm,
and you trust me to use it well and to not damage it, and if I do, make sure that I pay to repair it or whatever it may be. Then it's like, yeah, like there's no sense in all four of us taking on the burden of using this one piece of equipment that
mhm.
maybe, you know, it's like, what's the likelihood that all four of us would need it at any given time?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and so that's, I mean, can you imagine? So, like, put yourself back, I guess, maybe January, February, before you really started blowing things up, adding these other farms. Like, can you imagine what it would be like to try and scale this operation if you're just like, we're just gonna get more birds and we're gonna
yeah.
just run more houses on our property and just kind of keep it going?
Yeah, well, we thought about it, and inevitably we would to have bought a lot more land, so
Mm,
upfront costs on my side would have been substantially more for both the land, for the hens, for the houses, like it turns into, and that's the other piece of it is I personally think um, you can scale faster and more effectively through partnership than you can trying to do it on your own. Now you have with that you lose things like control and you lose things like a profit margin. Like your profit margin comes if I'm going to wholesale to a grocery store for $5 a dozen on my eggs. Well, then my profit margin is obviously more than if I have to buy those eggs from another farmer and then
mhm,
resell them to that grocery store. So you inevitably lose some profit margin, but the flip side of that is it gives you the ability to increase your reach. I think and yeah, and that it would be very painful if you had to buy all the land to scale to be at 10 or 20,000 birds and mobile coops, for example. But that's also the benefit of why I like our system is because we have farmers who have a handful of acres and they can make they may not do this full time. This isn't going to be their full time job, but it's something for their wife and kids to do at home. It's something for a little bit extra income, it's something to help make the mortgage payment every month. And so even if you just have a few acres, you can put a few hundred birds out there with us. And then, at least get a little bit of revenue generation off of it rather than the land just kind of sitting there unused. Yeah,
Can
I
we
think that
kind of
answers the question.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Can we sort of break down the economics of it? Because I know we have some property. We've got like five-ish acres of like good fenced in pasture land. The previous owner was they had horses here, so there's like a really nice horse barn and access to water and good fences. And so we've talked about like, oh, it's a real shame that we've got this property and we're not, we've got 9 chickens and 3 ducks. It's like we're
Mhm.
not really, we're not really making the best utilization of the space. And so I'm always kind of like trying to think like what can we do? Do we do pasture raised lamb? Do we do some like, do we do like cooney pigs and kind of go the primal pastures route and do that? And so I've obviously like run through the idea of like, well, maybe we'll just do like a supplemental kind of pasture raised egg production thing on the side. But
Yeah.
realistically, like, what are sort of the economics? Like, how many birds per acre? What are you looking at profit margin wise? Like, at what scale do you need to be to begin to make kind of a regenerative pasture raised egg operation profitable?
Yeah, a sort of ballpark number that I give folks is that, based, and I don't want to give too many details in terms of like what we pay farmers and what we charge to retail stores because our competitors are out there and they always want to,
Yeah, for sure.
they're coming after me for sure. But I always give farmers a rough ballpark number of depending on feed consumption for your hens and how you control feed, how much access to, how often you move your coop around, that sort of thing. You can net about $800 to $1,000 off of 300 to 400 birds per month. And so, some of our smallest farms only have about 300 to 400 birds. Some of our larger farms have like 3,000 birds.
Hmm.
And so that starts to create quite a bit of variation, obviously, but it does give you the ability, if you don't want to put as much into it on the front end, if you want to build your own small mobile chicken house and put 1,000 birds up, you can do that relatively affordably compared to putting up again like a $2 million chicken barn. And what we found is that farmers can make more on smaller flocks with us than they can a 10,000 bird flock with a big pasture-raised egg company, simply because one, my margins don't have to be as big, because our whole operation is me and a delivery driver right now. So I just don't need a big profit margin, so I can pay the farmers a lot better. And the flip side of that too is none of these guys are taking out loans to
Yeah.
put up, a mobile coop with us. So if you I mean, maybe you've got $2 million in cash sitting around that you don't mind, putting a chicken barn up, but most guys don't, so they have to take out a loan. And then obviously interest payments are fairly high at the moment. So,
And a lot of these guys are getting the money, like, they're getting the loan from the company that they would be turning around and selling
sometimes,
the
yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of that old school, you owe your soul to the company store at the end of the day. You're buying the birds from them, you're paying the loan on the barn that they paid for you to build, you're buying feed from them, like, I know at least in the sort of the meat bird operations, that we have around here, yeah, I mean, it's just like it is completely vertically integrated, but it's like, "Oh, but we buy from small independent family farms."
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
"Yeah,
yeah.
but you like, they're enslaved to you from
Yes.
start to finish."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what's challenging too is that, yeah, like you said, it does feel like I can't remember that proverb, which proverb it is, but it says like the borrower is slave to the lender,
Mhm.
and I've talked to a lot of farmers with a lot of poultry barns, and that's how they often feel, and I've even met farmers who put up a barn for some of these companies, and then so this was one thing that kind of broke my heart whenever seeing it from the corporate side is that I saw farmers who were Amish or Mennonite and they wanted to return back to their land, kind of back to their roots. They wanted to stay on the farm, stay with their family, work the land, and that sort of thing. And so they get told by this company that they're going to cash flow a certain amount per month if they put up a certain size barn, 10, 20,000 bird barn. And then they come back, they take out a loan to build the barn, they put birds in, and then all of a sudden it doesn't cash flow the way that they were told it was. And now I've seen farmers negatively cash flow on a 10,000 bird operation have to go get a job off the
Mm.
farm to pay just to keep that farm, just to keep the barn going, make the payments on the barn, and like that's the worst of both worlds because now you're in debt and you still have to go work another job, And so that was one thing that we really wanted to prevent for folks. And so we try to make our options pretty flexible. Like If you see our Instagram or anything like that, most of the pictures you're going to see are just from my backyard coop back here because, it only takes me 5 minutes to go take a picture of that versus driving to one of the other farms. And so two of us have that style of coop where it's kind of like solar powered. It's like, the sort of higher end of mobile coops, very convenient, basically a poultry barn shrunken down, into the size of a trailer. But then some of our farmers just have handmade systems where they've, built it all themselves. We have one farmer who has 1,000 birds in a mobile coop that he moves by mule every day,
Wow.
because he's an old order Amish guy, and so yeah, he hitches up the mules and moves it on skids. So you can do that, pretty cost effectively if you compare that to a large poultry barn.
And I'm assuming I know you are from seeing it, but I'm assuming you're using like Premier One, electric netting. Is that what kind of most everybody's using, or some people just sort of kind of letting them somewhat free range within like a
Yeah.
larger enclosure?
Yeah, I would say most of the guys are using some sort of temporary fencing around it as well. We kind of go back and forth depending on if I have enough time in the morning to like move the fencing or not, or not.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So like, and right now the pasture's pretty tall, so we've just been letting the chickens kind of roam. But whenever the grass is real low and chickens try to jump into our neighbor's yard a bunch, then yeah, usually we'll throw up the net, and that helps. That actually helps a lot whenever you start talking about the sort of like actual regenerative nature of regenerative agriculture in terms of like, ensuring that you're putting pressure on one section of land, and then as you move the coop, you're moving how much, where you're putting pressure, and then allowing that previous land to rest. And then, chicken manure is high in a lot of different nutrients, and so trying to make sure that the manure, rests in the land or goes into the land that you're trying to get it on. There's a lot of value in putting up that temporary fencing. But yeah, most of our guys are using it right now.
And how many of your farmers that you're working with are any of them, is this like sort of their sole sort of enterprise, or is this more of like they're
Not
doing it
right
on the
now.
side
Yeah,
or
everyone's kind of doing it on the side right now just because of the scale. We have had some folks who are interested in doing like 4 or 5,000 birds on like 40, 50 acres, where they've got a big swath of open pasture and they could put a handful of these houses out on. If they did something like that, it would be fairly realistic that somebody could do that for, their full-time job with maybe 4 or 5,000 birds. Yeah, unfortunately, and no matter what, when it comes to eggs, in order to make it a full-time job, you would have to do it at some semblance of a scale. You're not going to be able to do like 300 birds and I mean, maybe you can if you like are just fantastic at marketing and you can sell them for like $20 a dozen or something like that, then maybe you can pull it off. But um, yeah, the sort of nature of eggs right now is that yeah, you have to have some semblance of scale in order to make it like a true income producer where that's all you have to do. But um, yeah,
I think the fact that kind of everybody is sort of doing it as maybe like a glorified side hustle or just like an aspect to their farm business is sort of probably breeds some sense of resiliency. There's no like, oh man, we had a bad year, or maybe I can't imagine what sort of potential risks there may be, whether it's predation or crazy weather or, disease that runs through the
yeah,
flock, whatever it may be. But by it not just having a bunch of people that are all in 100%, that there
mhm,
is some resiliency baked in so that it's like,
yeah,
if you lose a farmer for a season, for, God knows, or, even if it's just for a, few months or whatever, one, that they're not totally, you know, out for the count.
yeah,
And it's like, and obviously you can sort of adapt and change what you need to do on your side of the business, but because they're not solely dependent on this egg production as like their main source of income, maybe it gives them the opportunity to sort of rebound and come back a lot quicker, and it's not
mhm.
sort of all in or all out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we actually encourage, all of our mobile coop guys to do multi-species grazing, because it's, it's always better if you have a ruminant and then you follow it with the chickens. And so yeah, a lot like I have cattle out back. Another one of our farmers has cattle. Another one has sheep. So we try to integrate multiple species into that one that's better for the land, like you said, it's better for the farmer too, and then gives them kind of another source of income as well, so that they're not completely dependent on just one system, which in all reality we shouldn't. We've sort of all in American society like specialized in a lot of ways. And so because of that, we've kind of gotten used to specialization, and we think like, okay, well, I'm an egg farmer now. This is what I do. I'm an egg farmer, and so I only farm eggs, and so we put up 20,000 birds, and now you have 20,000 birds worth of eggs, rather than thinking like, well, you know I need resiliency. I need community. I need, things that are actually of real value in life. Um, and so, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential with with the way that we're kind of operating our farms to give the farmer more resiliency than they would have with, one of the larger corporations who force them to specialize in one area. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you're talking to the guy that, quit his part-time job this week to go full-time on the farm. So, I'm now I'm like, "Oh, no, what have I done? I need to,"
Yeah.
but, I mean, the farm's been eating my lunch, and for me, it's more about being able to focus
Mm,
on this because it's kinda hard to if I had some super awesome paying job and this was just like a side hustle, it'd be different,
yeah.
but my other part-time job was at another farm. So, it's sorta
Yeah.
like, it's like if I'm gonna be working my tail off all
Might as well
summer
do it for
long,
yourself.
might as well do it for myself
Yeah.
and try to, leverage my time and to build something that
Yeah.
can, be more profitable in the future.
For sure.
Um, so do you think this is something because most of your people are doing this sort of on the side, whether it's someone like me who has a different farm business and maybe they have a little extra land, or maybe they're just a glutton for punishment and they're like, I only work 60 hours a week. I have so much free time. Let's do another business venture.
Mm.
Or if it's just someone who's like, I'm retired and I've always loved this or what. So I'll kind of pose it to you in two parts. One, working with a company like yours, or maybe even with your company if they happen to be somewhat local, of sort of selling into a co-op, selling into some sort of a collective program, or doing it on their is this something that's actually like economically viable for folks on a like a small business side of things?
Yeah, I think it is. Particularly going back to the sort of upfront cost, that is one of the sort of beauties of like if you read any of Joel Salatin's books,
Mhm.
he pretty consistently. I actually got a chance to spend like 6 hours with him just a couple weeks ago, but he is always very consistent about like do all of this as cheap as you possibly can. Don't drop millions of dollars into this like beautiful piece of land to try to make it this like style piece of property. Like just do what you can with what you get. It's kind of that's the story of entrepreneurship in a lot of ways too. It's just like do what you can right now with what you have right now, And so if you're 5 acres of property, you can at least generate a side hustle amount of off of this versus having to go all in and
Mhm.
do something where you're, again, I'm not a huge fan of like taking out huge loans for farms. And if you can avoid it, this is I think it's a pretty viable and good way to avoid going into a lot of debt to get, 800 to $1,000 or more. Some of our farmers will net substantially more than that per month. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty viable option.
And profit margin wise, where do you think most people are sort of shaken down at? Because I know, like, so the other farm that I worked on had chickens. At one point, they had a much bigger operation. They weren't sort of pasture raising them and moving like rotationally grazing them. Kind of 3 or 4 large chicken coops with, like, really big, large enclosures, and,
Yep. Yep.
and I think they were doing I think at their most that yeah, they had, like, 300-400 birds
Okay.
at a time, and basically told me that it was their loss leader. It was the thing that, like,
Mm,
brought people to their tent. They were, like, selling at farmers markets. But even still at this point, they're selling like $10 a dozen certified. I mean, they're not the eggs aren't certified organic, but
mm,
the farm is certified
right.
organic from the vegetable side, and they're doing all like certified organic grain.
Mhm,
And they're saying like, yeah, like we're basically we're charging $10 a dozen for however many dozens they get a week. And
mm.
it's like it gives us free eggs and it pays for the feed. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, $10 a dozen, like it's like the profit margin on this must be like super,
Yep.
super thin.
So this goes back to community, in my opinion, because if I were doing this as my own farmer, like just me by myself, and how we started was we would go to one of the local organic mills here, and I would buy bagged feed for our chickens, for example. Bagged feed is at this local mill is like 900. I'm giving you ballpark numbers here, but it's like $950 a ton for like for 1 ton of
Mhm.
bagged feed. And that's so that, again, I don't have a truck, I don't have a forklift, I don't have a feed bin, anything like that. So I was buying bagged feed. And they're not going to deliver it to my house for that, for that small of an amount for 1 ton. They're not going to run a truck
Yeah.
of like, loose feed out here. But now that we have a network, I just went out and met with them, and we can bring feed down into the low 700s per ton. And
Wow.
so you're talking about a $200 now that we've grown to a some semblance of a scale because we have multiple farms. They can run and make deliveries to multiple farms for them to start, scaling down. Well, for me, it's scaling up the quantity, and for them, it's scaling up how much money they'll make in the long run. And so they're willing to bring their costs down fairly substantially now that they know they're going to get multiple tons every couple of weeks from us. And so that's where I think, the small farmer really starts to get eaten alive a little bit is sort of the
Mhm.
like, again, if every one of the farms that we partner with, if they all had to have QuickBooks, if they all had to have, marketing systems, if they all had to have each piece of the puzzle, then they would all be scrapping by basically. But if we incur a little bit more of the costs or if we can bring everyone together to make things more effective, cartons, for example, if you buy egg cartons, like let's say you go on like eggcartons.com or whatever, and you buy some egg cartons, those egg cartons that you buy will probably cost you, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 cents, maybe a dollar per carton that you're going to pay.
Yeah.
For us, it costs us like 20 cents a carton, because we have the ability to buy in truckloads worth of cartons rather than, a UPS box worth of cartons. And so all of those numbers start to, whenever you're factoring in your per dozen your cost of goods sold, all of those numbers start to come down substantially once you start increasing your scale. And so, for your friends, they're probably doing it. They're probably doing it at just the right scale, where they're still incurring the cost of a small farm, but they're not really incurring the benefit of being a little bit bigger yet. And so that's where I think partnership comes in, is because if them and two other farms could partner together and they could get their carton costs cut down by half, and they could get their feed costs cut down by half, or maybe not half, by 20%, well, then now that starts to, there's your profit. That's where your profits are built right there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I just did some quick, like, back of the napkin math, and, and there remind me again what you were saying that you were when you were buying something from the mill, what was your, like, per ton price that
It's
you
like
were originally
950.
950? Yeah,
It's
and
like
there's so
750 now.
yeah, and so there's, like, yeah, and so they're, like, double that,
Hmm.
or more or less, buying bags of maybe a pallet's worth of 50-pound bags,
Hmm.
and then having those trucked to the farm and then dropped off and then, you know, or schmucks like me had to schlep them all the way from the gate into the barn or, whatever, throw them in the back of the truck or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're still paying double the cost, and then now at your scale, you're able to sort of cut that down,
Hmm.
by an additional 15 or 20%.
Yeah.
And so scale really, really does make a difference. Or go ahead. I thought you were gonna
Well, I was
say.
just going to say, I don't know what you're sort of like most of your listeners, what the sort of population demographic looks like, but if it's for folks who, are like in the process, making, starting up a small farm and kind of getting it up, you kind of have to make a decision at some point whether, and this was a conversation I had with Joel Salatin just a couple of weeks ago, and it really kind of like keyed me into our direction too, was whenever we first started, we were very much the craft. We were selling eggs for like $9, $12 a dozen, and so that's like the sort of craft end of things. But now that we've partnered with other farms, we're starting to get into major retailers. We're moving in the sort of direction of the commodity, and you sort of have to decide which one you're going to be. You can't really straddle both. You can't be like, well, I'm going to compete with Vital Farms on supermarket prices, or any of those companies with their pricing structure, and still do it at the sort of craft scale. If you're going to do it at a craft scale, you have to charge craft prices. You have to do $12, $15 a dozen just to make your mark. You're going to, if your goal is to like, yeah, maximize profit while still maintaining the systems. well, then you have to start looking at scale just so that, bring down what your cost of goods sold is, and so even thinking about from, if you're doing grass-fed beef or if you're doing a dairy operation or whatever, it's going to be the same no matter what you're starting. Is like, for you, if you're growing vegetables, I don't know what it costs you to like get a box to sell your vegetables in, but if you only buy 100 of those boxes a year versus if you bought 10,000 of those boxes of a year, well, then your price per box inevitably will go down if you increase your scale. And this goes again back to partnership. Is like, well, maybe if you find three farmers who are doing the same system as you and you guys all need boxes, well, then you can just get stickers that say whose box is whose or whatever, but you
Yeah.
guys could order them at scale, and then get the benefit of like, buying 10,000 boxes instead of buying 100 boxes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because the majority, I would say the majority of small farms are in that uncomfortable middle point where it's like, we trying to go the craft route. We're
Mm.
selling at farmers markets, we're selling direct to consumer,
Yeah.
but we're not so small that we can just sort of pick things up here and there, or we're so specialized where it's like, yeah, I can't just go to Tractor Supply and buy
Mhm.
a bag of whatever. It's like for
Yeah.
my operation, like I need this 2-ton bag of, soil starting mix,
Mhm.
or seed starting mix, and it's like because I'm used to it. I know what to expect and I know sort of the germination rates I'm going to get. And then I'm like, oh, well, now I have to invest in, $400 to get 2 tons of soil trucked into the farm. and
Mhm.
and and so we're all in this sort of weird place, and because it is a specialized industry, there's not 100, at least around here, there's not 100
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
places,
Mhm.
within an hour of you that you can order stuff from. So it's like,
Yep.
we're ordering fertilizer and kind of organic pest management stuff from a company in Virginia, and it's like you're going to pay a minimum of $200 in shipping, whether you're, $300 worth of stuff that's shipped in boxes from UPS, or you're going to get an entire pallet load of stuff. And so
Yeah.
then, yeah. And so we've started doing that. Me and another farm and a couple other people will all kind of pool in together, and we send a text like, hey, about to place an order. What do you need? Blah, 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 blah. Just Venmo me, whatever, or, cut me. And that's made the operation significantly better because I can benefit from sort of that kind of that bulk buying.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I think the more small farms start to do that, where they recognize that they can bring their costs down by partnering with other, even if you don't, even if you don't do what we're doing and you're like a true co-op where everybody's under the same brand name,
Mhm.
and you can still keep your own little operation, but you could partner with other folks just to get, cartons in, and then everybody puts their own label in. Or if you do dairy, everybody could get their own milk bottles and then just put your own sticker on or something like that, and that would make it a lot more. Yeah, I think for a small farmer, especially if you're really starting out, you got to take a really hard look at your cost of goods sold, and
Mhm.
really get a good understanding, and understanding that, particularly if you're doing it by yourself, there's going to be insurance, there's going to be, QuickBooks. If you print your invoices for some of your for some of your folks, there's going to be, the cost of the paper. Or if you hire a delivery driver, if like, this is one thing that whenever we hired our for, is like, workers comp,
Oh, yeah.
extra auto insurance, and then you bring on another vehicle, and then all of a sudden those sort of hidden costs start to add up really quick. And so take a really, really hard look if you're, just starting a farm or just starting to get into farming, about like what those kind of hidden costs are going to be that you might not expect, because that's what'll really eat into your margins as well.
Yeah. Couple more questions before we wrap up. One is, do you have sort of I hate to call it waste management, um, and maybe you have a better term from the industry, but, obviously, chickens don't just lay an indefinite amount of eggs forever and ever, and they never die.
Yep.
But sort of on your scale, or really on any sort of scale, what is your, standard operating procedure for sort of for the older hens that are
Yeah.
no like sort of past their prime?
Yep.
Do you sell them off to a processor and then they get turned in whatever, or is there some element of like, all right, well, maybe we can start up a direct consumer sort of, you know, by the cut,
Mhm.
pasture raised chicken operation? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so right now, so for the industry terms, I guess they'd be called spent hens, is what they're
Ah,
called.
okay. That
And
sounds
then
way
whenever,
better than waste management.
yeah, and then whenever you remove them from a bar or from an operation, it's called depopping, is what kind of just the industry name is. Depop the flock, depopulate the flock.
Mm,
Right now, we have two methods that we do. We either sell them to kind of just like local folks for like a local restaurant or something like that that they turn
mm.
into a stew chicken because that old it's
Yeah.
not quite as like tasty and yeah, it doesn't taste like a normal chicken breast that you buy in the grocery store. And so a lot of folks will sell them to people who use them as stew chickens, or we just sell them to other people who want backyard flocks and maybe don't want to pay don't want to raise their own chicks, or they don't want to pay $15 for a pullet or something like that. So that's kind of where we send our birds right now, is either just we just sell them locally for stew birds or for backyard flocks. The industry norm is that most of those birds will go into dog food. That's kind of like the normal what they'll
Mm,
get. As we scale, we're kind of looking into some would allow us to sell to folks who have kind of like a similar value system, regeneratively raised. For example, like if we did like there's companies out there who are doing like regeneratively raised dog treats and that sort of thing, so looking for I don't really have a fantastic answer for what you do with older hens. And the real challenge whenever you start looking at it as even though we're only sort of semi-commercial at this time, that was one of the values that I gained from working for a larger corporation, is I could understand the sort of processes and logistics that go into everything. And like at a certain point, your hens will only lay enough eggs to make it profitable for the farmer, right? Like at a certain point, the production rate will come down far enough that the farmer is feeding hens, and that feed is costing more than what he's getting from those eggs. And so at about the sort of industry standard is about a year and a half. So 80 weeks is whenever the big companies will generally depop their flocks. We've
wow.
been able to run our hens longer than that. And so we've actually, to bridge the gap between when we want to bring on a farmer and he can start producing for us, when we get like fresh hens for him, and we have been buying spent hens from some of these bigger corporations, putting them in mobile systems, and we actually see the health of the and so like we'll be able to run them for like an extra 4 or 5 months, and they'll still be at a relatively high production, because we put them outside. They get more sunlight, they get more natural food diversity from the bugs that they eat, from the grass that they're on, and so they live a healthier life. It's basically the same thing. Like imagine if you took a human being and they were locked inside of a like hospital, a sterilized hospital room for their
Mm,
entire lives, and then all of a sudden you like took them outside and got them exercising. Well, then they would
yeah.
become a healthier person, and so we're basically doing the same thing with some of these spent hens, is they've been in a pasture raised barn for 80 weeks or whatever, and we take them, we put them in mobile coops, and then all of a sudden they have all this access to like sunlight and the outdoors and fresh bugs, and so we increase the life of that hen. We keep production. We've actually, in some cases, we've been able to increase production from what it was whenever we got it from a commercial system. We've been able to, like, there was one farmer who went from 85% up to 90% once he switched the birds over to his barn. And so and so yeah, we're trying to lengthen the life of those hens, use them for a little bit longer, but then inevitably at some point we have to turn them into stew chickens, or give them to somebody for like a backyard flock.
So there's no like, Sunnyside bone broth or Sunnyside,
Not yet. I mean, I
chicken
would
noodle
love
soup cans, that are gonna hit
uh,
the shelves anytime soon?
I would love to. Yeah, we were actually just talking about this with pullet eggs. So if you're familiar with, like, I don't know, I never know how much people know about chicken. I knew nothing about
Yeah.
chickens or eggs before, but yeah, whenever a chicken first starts laying, it lays like really small eggs, right? And
Yeah, we
so,
call them fairy eggs.
okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the industry term's pullet eggs, but I like fairy eggs better.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're gonna get pullet eggs, and so we were like, "What do we do with all these pullet eggs? Because we can't pay farmers right now because we're so small. We can't pay farmers for eggs that we can't then
Mhm.
sell, right?" And so they start to get a bunch of these pullet eggs that we just inevitably can't sell right now. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to eventually turn that a like dehydrated eggs
Mm,
for like backpackers or something like that. That's kind of what we're looking into, like dehydrate them, turning into like, where you can just like pour the water in and
yeah.
reheat. So we started looking into that. It's not an option yet, but that's what we'd like to do with the pulled eggs at some point. So both on the front end and the back end, we would like to develop systems where it's like, the life of the hen provides alternative options, other than just like, but yeah, we're just not there yet. But I would like to do it someday. Yeah.
You just make a really colorful carton with a rainbow and some sparkles and call
That's
them
right.
fairy
Yeah,
eggs and
that's right.
charge the same price as a
That's a
normal.
good idea. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you may be surprised, how like, my wife would buy those in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
I can
yeah, that's
guarantee you.
funny.
I think that is one of those things that it's just another one of those things that is a benefit of collaboration and kind of working within a collective is that, like, you think that there is a way that it has to be done, and it's
Mhm.
like, I remember having a conversation with a farmer and in my context, it hasn't really worked, but it worked for them, that it was like, we inevitably will end up with a bunch of tomatoes that are just like
Mm,
have cat eyes or they're starting to
mhm.
split or what, they're not like the super premium ones that we can sell for 7.50 a pound or whatever.
Yeah, yep.
And and she's like, "Oh yeah, I just call them ugly tomatoes." And and I charge the same price and people love them. And I'm like, "Oh." And
That's
so
awesome.
it's one of those things and part of that may be like her brand, kind of her whole sort of vibe that she's
Sure.
giving off or whatever. Where I'm over here trying to be like Mr. Professional, like everything's super clean and polished, and
Yep,
it's like,
yep.
yeah, very Instagram worthy as,
Yeah, yeah.
the millennial trap can be for all of us. And so like, but maybe working within that, it's like, hey, like I will sell you all of my tomato seconds at this particular price because you can move them.
Mm,
And so it's like you can benefit by having way more of this one product that people know you for, and then I can get rid of a product that, that I can't. So,
yep.
um, it's just more of being able with each other.
Mm.
What are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned and that maybe us as growers or just as people,
Yeah.
from our Amish brothers and sisters who are out
Yeah. Well, community obviously has
there?
been
Yeah.
substantial, in my life, and even going from the military, which is by and popular culture is kind of considered to be like the ultimate brotherhood or whatever you want
Mm,
to call it. My experience was that was some of that, but I find a lot more community with Amish farmers than I ever did in the military or anything. And so, yeah, I think, even as they progress and some of them are starting to have cell phones and computers and they drive tractors basically like a car, they still hold very true to that sense of community. Now, there's also, there's some negatives that come with that where some of the communities that I know, they almost drive that too far where they reject everyone who's outside, everyone who's
mm,
outside of that community. That's obviously not healthy either. But yeah, really, really, relying on your neighbor for, if you need some milk, you don't go to Walmart to go get milk. You walk across the street to your, that's certainly a big part. And then the other one too is I always tell the story of so we used to live in Tennessee. We moved up to Kentucky. The first person I kind of made friends with was I had to go up to a farm store, a local farm store, just to for some feed or something, and the guy who owns it is an Amish guy, and that was he was same age as me, had kids the same age, and that was kind of just the first friend I made here in Kentucky, and so the first people we kind of started like going over to their houses for dinner and spending time with and stuff with was all Amish people, and every time we walked into their house the first thing I noticed as soon as we walk into the house was that they don't have TVs, and so their living rooms are set up where the seating is all in circles, and
mm,
so their living rooms are made for conversation, and so, like, the focus of the whole house, how the house is arranged, is all focused on conversation. And so if you walk into any other, normal American household, you look and the whole house is oriented toward a television, you
yeah.
know, and that's how our lives are. We all have these little pocket televisions now, and we're always just like watching. You go to the bank. It's like I can remember being, a kid, and you go to the bank or to, where you get your license at or whatever, and my dad would just like randomly talk to just whoever was in line next to him,
Just to
because
pass
that's
the
just like
time, yeah.
just to pass the time. You get, there's nothing else to do, so you just talk to them. But now if you go, literally every single person, and it's kind of a funny experiment whenever you look at it, is like just go the next time you go anywhere in public, just look anywhere there's a line, and like every single person will just be like head down on their phone. Um, and so that was like really striking whenever we first started like going to dinner at their houses, and then eventually it got to a point where we like came back to our house and we were kind of like, we need to get rid of the TV, because like, not because we think that television is inherently bad or anything like that, but it's just like, what do you want your family and your household to orient towards? What do you want to be like centered on? Do you want
Mm,
it to be centered on like the box on the wall, or do you want to be centered on conversation? Or we replaced the television with like this huge bookshelf, and our kids love to read, and so just what do you want to what do you want to emphasize inside your own home? Not, and so yeah, I think those two things are kind of what we picked up immediately from the Amish was definitely rely on each other, and then what do you want the focus of your home to be?
that's amazing. Yeah, I've had the privilege to interact a little bit. My dad grew up in a part of Indiana where there was a lot of Amish people,
Oh,
and so
nice.
anytime we've gone back and do that, and then I have a friend who is kind of a I kind of call him he's sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like he's not Amish, both
Yeah.
like religiously speaking or culturally speaking. But it's like if you saw him, you'd be like, if it
Yeah.
wasn't for that mustache, you would look pretty Amish, my
That's
friend.
funny.
And he's very, very old school. And he lived around potentially even a similar area, Tennessee. He was in Virginia, but it was like kind of right there,
Okay.
kind of that trying to yeah, and so I've just learned a lot of lessons from talking with him, and he's sort of like, "Yeah, here's the things that the way they live and the rhythms of their life," and it's been really, really inspiring,
Yeah.
to do that. Um, One last question, I'm kinda springing this on you, and I kind
Sure.
of always spring, but being able sort of glean from the people that we listen to then better ourselves either as just people or as particularly as growers. I think it's really important because not, very few of us have like discovered someone like totally in a vacuum. Like, oh yeah, I just happened to be at a library and was interested in chickens and I pulled out this book and just this guy named Joel and I don't know who he was. And next thing you know, it's like, very rarely is it like I discovered Joel Salatin totally on my own. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I watched a documentary, I
Yeah. Yeah.
saw something, whatever. And so being able to sort of celebrate the people that have inspired us so that the next generation can, that hopefully our words can then inspire them and then they can go back and
Mm.
listen to the people that have inspired us. All that being said, who would be the 4 people on your farm
Mm.
Mount Rushmore?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, Joel Salatin is definitely up there,
Mhm.
especially after I got to meet him. Super down to earth guy. I kind of had this, in my back of my mind, I was like, oh no, he's going to be just like a complete jerk, or he's going to be kind of like, the big persona kind of guy that he gets portrayed as sometimes. But he was super down to earth, very friendly. So Joel's definitely up there. Honestly, Paul over at Pasture Bird is probably up there as
Mm.
well, at least for me, just because. Yeah, I think, he's kind of building the model that we want to build, where he's kind of starting to incorporate regenerative agriculture into the mainstream, onto main grocery store shelves. Man, who else? I'm gonna forget all their names now that you put me on the spot. But Greg Judy is up there. That's who we actually really started with, was watching Greg Judy.
Awesome.
Do you even know? Do you know who he
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what whenever we first started, we were really interested in sort of, all the proteins, beef being one of them, and so we were just watching, Greg Judy's great because it's like no production value. It's like him
Yeah.
out there with
Absolutely.
a video camera or something, just like, here's my cows today, this is what we're doing,
Yeah.
and I really love that. Those would definitely be my top three, and the three that I watch the most. Yeah, the next maybe like Alexander Family Farms, those folks out there, if you're familiar, they're doing like, I want to say they're doing probably like 25,000. Either them or like Seven Sons. I watched a lot of Seven
Mm.
Sons stuff as well. I know that's not like one individual. Neither of those are one.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, I watched a lot of Seven Sons. We modeled some of our early stuff. Whenever we were first like building a prototype for our mobile coops, we kind of modeled it off the Seven Sons style. Um, and we tried out Gray's Cart, if you're familiar with Gray's Cart, which I think was built by the Seven Sons guys at first. And we tried that out for a little bit. And so, yeah, a lot of the, both Alexander and Seven Sons are doing, I think, like 10 to 20,000 birds or something like that in mobile coops, all layers. And so it can be done. And that's one of the encouraging things for like me personally is that there are people out there who are doing it at a large scale on individual farms. So now if we just piece multiple of those farms together, well, we can, and this is kind of like our, vision for the future is that we see agriculture as a spectrum. On one side, particularly for egg production, on one side you have like the cage system where there's a million birds in a barn. Every bird is in its own little cage. It never goes outside, never does anything. And the sort of total opposite end of that spectrum is like full regenerative, where you're multi-species grazing and chickens are always out on pasture. The only way that we sort of move from the caged production towards regenerative agriculture is by creating the logistics, the networks necessary to bring multiple farms together. You can't do it just one farm by yourself. And there's a famous, I think it's Napoleon who said it, who said that tactics win battles and logistics win wars. And
Mm,
so if we're going to change the way that food is produced to be more humane, to be more sustainable, then we have to solve the logistics solution, because the on-farm solution has already been found because people are already doing it. But what we have to find is the logistics to like truly change food production. So, um, yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but yeah.
awesome. Well, Patrick, thank you so much. It was cool. Definitely going to kind of send and kind of keep it in mind for, our instead of maybe like, maybe if we do kind of get into more protein, animal production type stuff, maybe instead of it being like, all right, am I going to sell this next to my
Mm.
vegetables at the farm? Maybe it's kind of opened my mind to different ways. And hopefully for folks out there who have been listening, maybe it will either, this will be the impetus for them to do it themselves or partner with some to kind of take the necessary steps. And it sounds like that at this rate of growth, you should be to like 2 or 3 million birds by the end of the year.
That's right. That's right. If
Yeah,
we continue the same exponential growth that we've had, yeah, we'll surpass Cal, Maine as the largest food, egg producer in the country in a matter of years.
awesome. Well, Patrick, thank you so much, and I wish you the best this year. Kind of your first real year of operating, and thank you for putting in the hard work to make sure that we can have regenerative food for all the eaters out there.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for that.
All right, everybody, another episode in the bag. Big thanks to Patrick for sitting down and talking with me. I've been really wanting to make this pivot of not to just talk about vegetable production. We can kind of get into a little bit of a rut. We could just talk about that day in and day out, honestly. There's so much out there to discuss with it, but it's nice to get a little bit of a refresher and see a different perspective of this small scale earth healing part of agriculture that seems to be our little corner of the internet over here at the Rookie Farmer podcast. I'm really excited to see what they're going to do in the future and how they sort of build this smaller regenerative egg company, but do it at scale in a way that can really be successful and profitable and hopefully replicatable. So if you are interested in what Patrick is doing or anything that they have going on over at Sunnyside, please feel free to reach out to him. Go to Instagram, go to his website, and see what they're doing and see how maybe you can either partner up with him or maybe you can learn from him and you can replicate that in your region of the country. Once again, huge thanks to Diego and the whole team over at Modern Grower for making the show possible. Wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. And if you need tools, things like row cover, shade cloth, pre-cut landscape fabric, the Sumi soaker, the Jang cedar, I'm pretty sure all of these things that I've just mentioned are all things that I'm using currently this week on the farm. These are not just tools that you use from time to time, but these are everyday essentials for the market garden, and they are all from Modern Grower. So please go over to shop.moderngrower.co and you can check out the amazingly curated list of tools, soft goods, kit, and microgreen seeds that they have over there. I use them every single day, and I know you will too. And just a reminder that we believe in value for value. We never want to put this show behind a paywall. We never want to make you sign up for Patreon, and we never want to bombard you with advertisements and sales and all of these different things. We try to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. But that means that we are giving this to you free of charge, asking nothing in return. So if you find this content valuable, if you think that the podcast that we're putting out every single week is helping you become a better grower, helping you feel inspired, or just helping you commiserate and feel like you have someone who's in your corner that understands the challenges you're going through, please consider kicking some of that value that you have received back our way in the form of a donation. You can send us $1, $5, $10, whatever you feel like it's worth, as often as you feel like you can. Every little bit helps. We want to upgrade equipment. We want to carve out more time to make the podcast even better. We can't do it without you. So in advance, thank you so much. All right, folks, another great episode in the bag. I'm going to get to bed because it's late and I'm tired, but you have been listening to the Rookie Farmer Podcast. I am your host, Alec, and until next time, blessings and peace.